Hello, good morning, everyone. Hi, good morning. Hi, it's so good to see so many of you bright and bushy-tailed and eager for day two of the 2023 NGC Bocas Lit Fest. And we can think of no finer way to kick off this morning's proceedings than a one-on-one with the inimitable Bernardine Evaristo in conversation with her mentee, Ayesha Harruna Attah. Please give them a round of applause. I will hand over expeditiously to Ayesha because I'm sure you're very eager to hear from both of them. But I want to say a special thanks to the Rolex Mentor and Protégé Arts Initiative who've helped to make this event possible. Please enjoy.
Hi everybody, thanks very much for coming to this event with Ayesha Harruna Attah, who is my mentee for the Rolex Protégé and Mentor and Protégé initiative. We're going to tell you a bit about this scheme. Just to say, this is not an event about me and my work necessarily, okay? This is about mentoring in a broader sense, the scheme that we're on, and it's as much about Ayesha as it is about me. So this isn't a Girl, Woman, Other event, okay? Just to let you know. So the Rolex scheme has been running for over 20 years now, and they partner mentors with mentees in 7 different disciplines in the arts, including architecture, and it happens every 2 years. And I am the literature mentor for 2023 to 2024 over a 2-year period. It is kind of like the Rolex of mentoring schemes. I'd want to say Rolls-Royce, but that's off-brand, right? But it's a really incredible project whereby they have all kinds of nominators who get us to the stage where I picked Ayesha as my mentee. So they have nominators who pick the mentors. The first literature mentor, I think, was Toni Morrison. So, and that's when I first heard about it, about 20 years ago. And I remember thinking, oh my God, Toni Morrison is mentoring a writer through this scheme. And it was just incredible to hear about that. And at that stage, I wanted to be involved with it as a mentee, probably, envisioning that I would be perhaps one day mentored by Toni Morrison. And Margaret Atwood also mentored Naomi Alderman, who is one of our sort of leading writers in the UK now. They've had Martin Scorsese, Spike Lee, Anish Kapoor. The list of mentors is incredible. So they have a nominating panel who choose the mentors. And then when the mentor is chosen and they came to me and asked me, and of course I said yes, with them, we kind of come up with a nominating panel to find the mentee. And that is people in the field where you want the mentee to come from. So I wanted an African woman living on the continent as my mentee, because I'm pretty accessible in the UK, and there are lots of opportunities in the UK, but I wanted an African woman living on the continent. And so we came up with a panel of, I think it was 6 nominators, who they went through this very complicated process of coming up with a list of about 26 potential candidates. The other thing was I wanted it to be somebody who not necessarily new. I didn't really want somebody who was new to writing. I wanted somebody who was established, somebody who I felt would really run with this mentoring. And I didn't want to be investing my time in somebody who, at the end of it, may decide that I want to be a writer. What a waste that would be. So I said, it doesn't matter if they've published books before. And also, I didn't want an age restriction, because, as we know, there is a huge issue with ageism in our society, full stop. But also, people think new, kind of up-and-coming writers as being young. But actually, some of the greatest writers coming through at the moment are older women in their 40s and 50s. There's a writer called Jacqueline Crooks who's published a book called Fire Rush, which I absolutely adore. And it's her first novel, and it's just been shortlisted for the Women's Prize, and she's 60. And I think it blows pretty much most other books out of the water. So So I didn't want that age restriction. So they then presented me with a list of 4 possible mentees, of which Ayesha was one. And the mentees came from different parts of the world, and we met in London for a week, and they were kind of being interviewed by me. And I chose Ayesha for several reasons. She's actually published 4 novels. Sorry, 5. I meant, no, sorry. Sorry, thank you. Numbers, mere numbers. I'm really bad with numbers. So 5 novels, and she's had a degree of success as a writer. She is very African-focused with her subject matter. She's very woman-focused. She has an experimental quality to her work. She's really committed to telling the stories that haven't been told, especially with The 100 Wells of Saliga, which is a novel set in the 19th century. So it's a historical novel. We know we don't get many historical novels coming out of, sort of deeply historical novels coming out of African writing, Black British writing, possibly even Caribbean writing, I'm not sure. So for those, and then when we met, she liked my work. Right? I believed her. And sometimes some of the other writers, you didn't know if they'd read the work, right? So, you've got to do your prep, right? If you're going to come and meet with someone who's possibly going to be your mentor, you need to have read the work and prove that you've read the work. And maybe even feel that there's something that can be taught from the work. And she was also very easy to get on with. So this is a 2-year scheme. So you need somebody who's going to be really kind of personable, great sense of humor, really intelligent. And but really, it's ultimately the work really was brilliant writing. And I thought, what I can do with Ayesha is we can take her work to the next level. And that felt like, that she was perfect for that, perfectly placed for that. And that I knew that she was going to continue to write books, that she wasn't going to disappear, and after 2 years you feel, what was the point of that? That she already had a strong foundation as a writer, and that we could build on that together. So we have been working together now for several months, and we've met in London so far. This is the first time we've gone abroad. I thought it would be great for her to come here to network with other writers, to also talk about herself and sort of become part of the wider literature community, because Ayesha lives in a little village, which I'm sure she's going to tell you about, in Senegal. And she's Ghanaian, but she lives in Senegal, and that's away from certainly the global metropolis in terms of where, the publishing world and the literature centres are within a certain context. And so we started working together, and it's not just about looking at Ayesha's work either. So this is a mentoring scheme with a difference. You might think, oh, this is about me giving feedback to Ayesha on her work. But it's about so much more than that, because being a writer is about so much more than that. So it is about an intergenerational transmission of knowledge, which is something that Rolex is very keen on. And, we are 2 different generations. Do you mind saying how old you are?
I'm turning 40 this year.
40 this year? I'm 63.
And then it was very interesting for you to mention that age was not a thing you were looking at, because I remember when the nomination came in, and I looked at all the requirements, and I was like, okay, I'm turning 40 soon. Do they realize that? Okay, I hope they're not going to kick me out because I'm turning 40 soon. So
yeah. So we are 2 different generations. I could be your mum, right?
Yes. Yeah.
I could.
Yeah.
So that transmission of knowledge was really important, but that's not also to centre my knowledge as well, because I feel that it's a 2-way partnership. Ayesha has grown up on the continent of Africa. I've grown up in England. Her relationship to literature is different to mine. You have a deep relationship with the continent where my father left 1949. So my relationship with it is much thinner, and from a very, very different perspective as a British person. So I do feel that it is a mutual sharing of knowledge and ideas. It's also to talk about literature, to have a discussion about literature, to have a discussion about why we write, how we write, about our inspiration and literary influences, but also, you know, influences beyond literature. Because when we talk about literature and what inspires us, often we are talking about other writers. That is just one little aspect of what inspires us. So we've also had those conversations. We will be continuing to have conversations about also other art forms. I'm very inspired by theatre, which was my original background, and also the visual arts. When I go to visual arts exhibitions, I know I'm nourishing my imagination, because they are out of this world, often, visual artists, in terms of what they're doing, especially compared to what writers are doing. So it's about guiding her in a way as well as a writer through the industry, so inspiration. And also we've been talking about personal development, about goal setting, about being ambitious, which I think is one of the most important things that we need to share, about how you become successful in what you're doing. And of course there is success in the creative process in itself, but then there is the career success in the wider world. And that's something that we have to learn how to navigate. And we've been talking about that. So, and other things as well, you know. So it's a very broad understanding of what mentoring means, and it's something that I have been involved in for a very long time. And that's also why Rolex asked me to do it, because they knew that I was somebody who is passing on to future generations, that I am somebody who has set up mentoring schemes in the past in the UK and so on. So, yes.
Did you have a mentor?
No.
Okay.
No. I think the idea of mentors is relatively new, probably. I didn't study creative writing. I learned to become a writer through writing and reading. I didn't have a mentor. My role models...
Didn't have anyone who just saw your work and said, this needs to be out there, Bernie?
No.
No.
It's a good thing, though. It was a good thing, because you have to find it within yourself. You know, you have to believe in yourself and not relying on other people to validate you. And I think at the time you want those people to say, yes, you are it, you are the future. But actually, you need to believe that yourself, because if you're having a lifelong career in the arts that is going to last, could be even 80 years if you start at the age of 20, right? You need to have such a solid degree of self-confidence and belief in what you're doing, irrespective of what anyone else is telling you.
How do you build that? I think a lot of us that come to writing have very fragile egos, even though it's a thing that puts us out there. But how do you build that unwavering belief in yourself?
So you're asking me this, but I think you have it, you see.
Sometimes.
Well, you have written 5 books, you know, and so I think even though you may not realize you have it, and it is something you can build on, and we have talked about that, you do have that inner strength that keeps you going.
Yeah, I'm stubborn. I think that helps me, just being dogged about getting things done, and I'll keep doing it. I'll keep making mistakes, but I think my stubbornness helps me. Yeah.
Absolutely, and I'm very stubborn as well.
Okay.
And that is part of what it takes. Irrespective of other people's lack of maybe belief in you. But that self-confidence is something that, and we have talked about this, I developed through personal development courses that I went on, and books and audio tapes when I was in my 30s in the 90s. And I would listen to these tapes saying, you can do it, you can go, mostly coming from America, you know, you can achieve anything you want, set unrealistic goals, because realistic goals are not really a vision of where you can be, you know, that's just the next step. And positive thinking, surround yourself with like-minded people who are positive, don't let other people's negative energy drag you down. Plan your life, plot it, even though it's going to go all over the place. And I suppose one of the things for me was how to be ambitious in a society where you are not, okay, I'm talking about Britain as a black person. I'm not talking about Ghana or Senegal, because I think that's probably different.
It's different. But in a different way, I'll talk about that.
Yes, so how do you believe that everything is available for you, and that you have a right to succeed in whatever endeavor you're in my case, the arts and literature, when the society around you has already decided that you are not one of the people whose voices, whose stories are the most important. Mentoring, nobody would think that Boris Johnson needed a mentor. I think you all know who Boris Johnson is, because he is somebody who's been born into the elite. He went to the most elite public school in the world. He went to one of the most elite universities in the world. He comes from an elite background. And actually, his whole life is about being guided and steered by people who are in the ruling elite. So he doesn't need it, but for the rest of us, you know, especially if you're a woman, if you're a black woman, a woman of color, then you need that help. But you talk about it.
Yeah, so in Ghana, it's a different kind of fight. It might be the same in the Caribbean, where your parents want you to become a doctor or a lawyer, and the arts are seen as not that important. I remember my grandmother telling me to get a real job at some point. So hearing these kinds of voices can do something to your self-confidence. Like, am I on the right track? Will I get the support I need if the society is telling me what I do is not important? So it was different. But now that I have written, I've seen young people come up to me and say they're now, like, in Ghana, pushing their way forward and just doing it. And I think there's a different relationship to the arts now than, like, my parents' generation. You have young people now just, from an early age, just going out and doing it, and it's not really about money anymore. Whereas my parents were like, you need to be able to live off this. So it was a different kind of relationship.
Can you tell us about your first university education?
So I grew up in Ghana, and then I went at age 17 to Mount Holyoke College in Massachusetts. Mount Holyoke? Wellesley, yay, Seven Sisters! And again, growing up, it seemed like, okay, if you want to succeed in life, you have to go to London or go to America, like, leave the country to make it. And if I could have done it over, I think I would have stayed in Ghana and gone to university there and still been a writer, but I'd have stayed in Ghana. Now that I've done life, I think there is something to be said about, like, just homegrown ways of thinking, and I wish I'd deepened that before stepping out to do an MFA wherever. So I went to Mount Holyoke and I studied biochemistry because I was going to become a doctor. And I started taking writing classes. Oh, I have to say my parents are journalists, so I don't know why they were telling me to become a doctor. It's funny, I think my mother was more encouraging in her quiet way, but my dad, at some points when I told him I don't want to do medicine anymore, I want to go to J school, I want to study journalism, he had an uncle, because he couldn't say it to my face, he had an uncle call me to say, writing should be your hobby, you can, look, there are doctors who write, make it your hobby, and that's when the stubbornness kicked in, and I said, no. I'm going to do this. And so I applied for journalism school with, like, very little experience, very few clips, and I was accepted. And I did journalism also as a way to sort of be able to survive, because this is early 2000s in the US, and I thought, okay, I could work with a magazine, like a magazine like Vanity Fair or the New Yorker. Everybody wanted to work with the New Yorker. That was the goal. And then reality hit very quickly, that it wasn't a very easy path to get to. So I did, I worked in an online magazine, with Yachting Magazine. That was my first job. Yachting Magazine, and I reported on luxury property. I never got to see one of said luxury properties, but I would call and take notes. And then again, I had encouragement. There was one, I guess he was the manager of one of these properties, a timeshare. He actually wrote to my editor to say, she writes really, really well. So that was a little push, external, but one of those things that kept me going, like, okay, even though I'm not doing what I want to do, I can still, I'm still writing, I'm still exercising that muscle. And then my visa ran out, and it was time to go back to the continent. And I got this opportunity within 2 weeks to write my first novel. So life just worked itself so nicely. I went to Senegal to work with a Ghanaian writer, Ayesha Harruna Attah. He wrote The Beautiful Ones Are Not Yet Born. Then I spent 9 months with him, and
that was a mentoring relationship, wasn't it?
It was.
Can you tell us about that?
So there were 4 of us, 4 African writers. And again, the age thing came up. You had to be between 25 and 35. I was 23. And I said, listen, I'm mature, please take me. I really want to do this. So they had a meeting and agreed to take me on. So I was the youngest of the group. And for 9 months, I got to sit with Ayesha Harruna Attah, talk to him. He had us reading a lot. It was very reading heavy, and then we would write and workshop each other's pieces for the day. And at the end of the program, I had a book-length manuscript. So yeah. But it was a lot of hand-holding. Like he was the kind of mentor who was more like, okay, this sentence doesn't make sense. Let's rework it. Or why are characters doing this? We should do that. And yeah, and it helped me then, but I realized, like, as the years wore on, that wasn't the kind of mentorship I needed long term. So now I broke up with that mentor a long time ago. I don't know if he will watch this, but I'm sure he knows, because yeah.
So at the point at which the Rolex project came calling, how did you feel about your career? Where were you with your career? Because you were 5 books in.
Yeah, this is a great question, because the 5th book, which I love, I wrote during the pandemic, and I thought I need to write a light-hearted book if we're all going to die, because I love rom-coms, and I just need to do what I want to do. But it didn't have that bang that I hoped it would, and I was at the point where I was ready to give up. I have a small ice cream shop in my village, and I thought, okay, I'm going to make an ice cream empire if this writing thing doesn't work out. And then the nomination came. This was in March of 2022? I think it was in March 2022. And it just came at the perfect time. I was going through a rough year to begin with, and it just gave me a new lease on life, like they say. And it's been a boost to my self-confidence, and it's given me time. Like, I don't feel like I have to rush, which is the feeling I had at certain points in my career. Like, I have to just get this done. But now I can take my time, and we've been working since, when did I see you? I saw you in December last year, and I still haven't shown a word of my work to Bernardine yet. So that time to like really work on my text and rewrite, which is what good writing is invaluable, I think. Yeah.
And what do you hope to get from the scheme?
So I hope to get your insights. I hope to be able to produce a book that is out of this world. I am producing a book that is out of this world. I hope to be able to spread it on. Like, when we talk about this transmission, I hope that some young writer out there is going to see this and think, okay, I want to do this too. I hope to be able to just inspire other people also through this. And there's so many things, but I think at the core of it is producing a really good work of fiction, ultimately. Like, Rolex also talks about excellence, so I think at its heart, I want to produce an excellent book. Yeah.
And so in terms of the other books that you published, you've said about the last one.
Yeah.
What didn't happen that you wanted to happen?
So I'll give you a brief summary of all 5 books. So the first one came out of the mentorship program with Ayesha Harruna Attah. And it did surprisingly well, but it was also, I always say, it's a step above self-publishing, because he had a publishing house, but I did the layout, I chose the designer, which was a lot of fun. I learned so much from that process. I had my mother editing, I called all my friends to work on that book. In hindsight, it would have been great to have a professional editor, like just get it into good shape. So that's that one. I still love it. It's my first baby, and it's called Hamatan Rain, 50 years of Ghana's history, told through the lens of 3 women, 3 generations of a family. And then the second book I call my MFA book, because I did my MFA at NYU, and this is the book that came out of it. Again, I think it had a lot of potential, but it could have been pushed more. I don't think this was my fault. I think this was a marketing publicity issue. I think it could have been pushed more. It got translated into Dutch, so that felt like, okay, we're getting somewhere. The 100 Wells of Salaga, the third book, which was the book that I really feel like is my first novel because I wrote myself. I didn't have my MFA professors or my previous mentor like just telling me how to write. So it felt like my first real book. And that did pretty well. That got translated into about four languages. And I was happy with the outcome of that one. I was very happy with that book. And the spin-off led to a young adult novel, The Deep Blue Between, which has done relatively okay as well. I think the biggest moment for me was it's set in Ghana, Nigeria, and Brazil. And when Brazilian readers got it and thought they could see themselves in it, I thought, okay, I've done my work. I'm happy. So that was the way it worked. But it brings to mind the question, what does success mean to you? Because for me, that book was successful when it reached its Brazilian readers. It didn't have the financial results that I would have liked, but when it got to that Brazilian reader who responded to it, I thought, okay, I'm good.
So success, it's an interesting concept, isn't it? Because, you know, we don't write to win awards. We shouldn't write to win awards because that seems to me to lack integrity. You know, we write the books that we need to write for whatever reason, and we produce the finest work that we are capable of producing, and then we are published. Hopefully, those books are published by publishing houses who will do what they do with it. And some cases, books are pushed out there into the world and they're brilliantly marketed, and you know, they have a life of their own. And in a lot of cases, the books aren't pushed out into the world, and the writer really has to struggle. And that was certainly my early experiences. You know, my first publisher was People Tree Press, who are a fantastic publisher. They've published several writers at this festival. This was in 1994. They're very small, so it was very hard for them to compete with the big poetry publishing houses such as Faber, Carcanet, or Bloodaxe. But I had learned, because this was when I was doing all the personal development courses, that I shouldn't wait for anybody to push my work, I should push it myself. And so I used to get leaflets produced and send them out through mailing lists. I took my books everywhere, put them into the hands of critics who might then review the books. I was hustling, I was a hustler. And I really only stopped hustling when I won the Booker Prize.
Okay.
And I used to have a sort
and
of...
this is 8 books in, or?
Yes,
Yeah.
this is 2019.
Okay.
So I always felt that I should just do as much as I could to get my work out there, because I spent up to 5 or even 6 years on my books, and then you just have really, really kind of like inconsiderable sales, and it's very dispiriting when you get the statements, the royalty statements every 6 months, and I might have had very good reviews, but then you see the sales and you think, oh my God, like 1,000 people read this, or not even that, maybe. It's just awful. So I had to develop incredible self-belief to keep believing in the work, because it wasn't reaching the audience I wanted it to reach, and I had discovered ambition with a big capital A. And so I continued to self-promote, and people used to say, oh my God, you're such an operator, you're such a self-promoter, and I'm like, what's wrong with that?
Yeah.
Why should we be passive and expect other people to promote our work? If it's not happening, you need to do it yourself. And so that's what I did. So success for me was the fact that I was writing these books. They were experimental, they were different, they were exploring different aspects of the African diaspora. I was developing my skills with each book. They were all very distinct from each other. Generally speaking, I really enjoyed the process. When writers say to me how painful writing is to them, I don't know why they do it, because they don't have to do it, right? If it's a painful process for you, like from beginning to end, don't do it. For me, I find it incredibly creatively rewarding and satisfying, the process, even though it may take many, many years. So that was the success for me, because the external markers of success were not coming my way. I mean, they were in sort of dribs and drabs, you know, but not in the way that they've come my way since 2019. So the success was leading a creative life and being true to myself and writing the books that I wanted to write. And then post-Booker, success has meant something very different, because it's my work, my name is out there in the world, and I have a level of acknowledgement. And
people would stop us in the streets in London because Bernie's a superstar.
Which actually I don't mind.
Yeah, I was surprised.
I don't mind. It's great to know that I don't have to, because for many years I'd introduce myself. Oh, who are you, Bernardine Evaristo? I'm a writer. Oh, right.
What have you written?
Or years ago it would be, have you written anything? You know, which of course if you're a school teacher, people don't say, have you taught any students? But if you say you're a writer, people kind of doubt somehow, because you don't look like a writer, you know. So that was the case for such a long time, and then maybe they had heard of my name, but because I wasn't famous, I was kind of dismissed within a literary circles, because, you know, the literary circles are as hierarchical as other circles. I'm very aware of that, you know, being at functions and people don't want to talk to you, or they look past you to the famous person in the room, and then they're talking to you and you realize they're not looking past you. They really want to talk to you, because you are that person in the room, you know. But I see it for what it is at the same time. So there are two levels of success. There's the creative success and then the external markets.
And for people, I think some writers tend to be very introverted. I'm between the two. I can be out there if I really need to be. But for a young writer who is just painfully shy, how do you self-promote?
You've just got to do it. You know, people say to me, I've just come off Twitter because I bought a blue tick, and it's so shameful. I didn't realise that I would be like seen as a traitor. Sell out. You can't get rid of it. Once you've got it, you can't get rid of it. So, and Elon Musk did not give it to me. I do not have 1 million followers, right? So they know that I would have bought it before I realised that nobody was going to buy it. So if you're shy, you can still. We were talking to a writer yesterday, weren't we? If you're shy, you know, you can choose to just be passive in this industry and not promote yourself at all. Right? That's a choice you can make, because you're shy. Or you have to get stuck in. And one of the ways you can get stuck in, even if you don't like the platforms that exist at the moment, is through social media. So that's one of the ways you do it. I have known writers who have read from their first books, and they sit there like that and they talk down to the page and then they finish and look up. And because they're so painfully shy, they've never done this before. And then 10 years later, I've seen them and they're working the crowd.
Oh, wow.
So the shyness is something that you may feel inside you, but you have to develop yourself so that you can be the person who can do public speaking, who can approach strangers when you need to in order to get something done for your work, who engages with social media in a positive way. Because people do come to me and they say, oh, I've got my book coming out, I'm not on Twitter, can you please tweet for me? I'm like, no, get on Twitter. You tweet. I'm on Twitter because I needed to be. You need to be on Twitter. So anything and everything is insurmountable. However you feel inside at this particular stage in your life, you know, you can get over it. What time is it?
We have about
25 minutes, because I want to open it up to the audience. Shall we do that now, actually?
Yeah, we can.
Let's open it up.
Okay.
So who's got any questions? Barbara. So Barbara, I mentored Barbara Jenkins over here.
Yay!
Yes, yes. She was also the most amazing mentee, and it was the Arvon, or was it the Hollock Arvon? What was it called? Mentoring scheme, which was competitive.
Okay.
I was the mentor. Barbara won it, and then we worked on her amazing novel, The Writer's Place.
Nice.
You know.
Actually, what I wanted to say is that that was my second book, and I did not consider myself a writer. It's a hobby that came very late in life. And when I sent in a short story to be considered for this prize, it was just sort of, throwing my hat in the ring. I was doing nothing at the time. I'd long since retired. I was about 73 when they gave me Bernardine, and I thought, my God, I've hit the jackpot without even trying. And when she started with me, she said, send me a piece of the work you're doing. Well, I sent bits of writing, and she said, it's a story about a bar. Have you got a character map for these characters? And I thought, Jesus, what is a character map? So, of course, Professor Google helped. And I saw that you had to sort of see how people were related to each other in the story. And I plotted that and sent her back something which I think must have been convincing, because she decided to keep me on after that. And it was an absolutely amazing process. I had never shown my work to anybody before. I don't have readers. I don't seek advice. This is not a career. This is a joy that came late in life. So when she started pointing out things that needed to be adjusted, I thought somebody really is interested in making this work. Not just me in my fumbling way, but somebody who knows what to do. And it was far and away the most rewarding teaching experience I've had in writing. Mind you, it did not make me ambitious. You didn't give me that course. It did not, you did not show me how to push my work. And I'm one of these so-called shy writers in that while I'm willing to talk, I'm not willing to push. And in any case, as I said, it's not a career. When you start writing at 70, 71, hey, in any case, you've had a life already. And writing isn't it. Writing is a delight. And thank you for making it so. Thank you for making me feel I could sit down in front of a page and just get away with it. Thank you very much, Bernardine.
The thing is, for those of you who know Barbara, I hit the jackpot, right? Because, yeah, she's an amazing writer, an amazing person, and it was a total pleasure. I'm sorry I didn't give you the personal development strand, because that mentoring was more about just the novel, wasn't it? So I wasn't thinking in a broader way. But yeah, you were just so receptive, and you had been a teacher as well. And sometimes teachers are the worst people to work with because they're used to being the teacher, right? But you were just brilliant to work with and have gone on and had this great career. Well, I think you've had a great career, so yeah. Thank you, thank you. Okay, Jan.
Thank you. Ayesha, can I ask you to talk a wee bit about how you posture yourself as a mentee? Because I love that you're saying you're stubborn. I think that's a great trait to have in a woman. How do you posture yourself to hold on to what you don't want to change about yourself, but also to be open to taking on board critique and advice from your mentor?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think I soak it all in. I write a lot, so as I'm with my mentor or with whoever is transmitting something to me, I'll write it all down, soak it all up, and then it's sort of like by osmosis. What wants to stick will stick, and if I hear something that really doesn't agree with me, then I just drop it. And I think in asking questions, also you can finesse what it is you need. You ask questions and your mentor gives you feedback, and like whatever it is you need is what is going to stick. So I'm very open, and I leave myself open to to all sorts of suggestions. But I also, like some of the suggestions Benny told me, like I went home and that day I just wrote it all down because I was sort of like teacher's pet in school also, so I'm like, I need to get it done. But I've also reached a point in my life where I know what works for me, so I can be discerning that way.
Yeah, and so that is also why you were chosen, because she was receptive to the conversation.
Yeah.
But it is a conversation. And I teach at Brunel University in London. I've taught there for a long time, and I've taught for a very long time. And I'm not a prescriptive teacher. I can't be. And I don't teach rules either. So it is really about making suggestions. And also with Barbara, you make suggestions and then people will follow it through or not, depending on what they want to do. Because the most important thing about creativity is that people stay true to their own creativity, right? And that you don't try to impose your aesthetics, your values, your way of writing onto them. But I think that's actually destructive. And that's also one of the great things about mentoring schemes, is that you do have an individual relationship. And if it's that kind of relationship, which is two-way and which is about a conversation and not dictatorial, then I think in some ways it's much more successful than perhaps the kind of more traditional university education, where you have a limited number of teachers who are teaching a broad range of the student body and don't have that kind of close, intimate working relationship with you, because that's what mentoring gives you. It's one-on-one. It's you and that person, and so long as it's the space is a positive space, it's so enriching, and you can almost get more work done than in a short space of time than if you were doing a university degree. Except obviously there aren't that many mentoring schemes around. One of the schemes I set up was called the Complete Works, which was a poetry mentoring scheme in the UK, which was to develop poets of colour. And I initiated it in 2007. It ran for 10 years, and 30 poets went through this mentoring scheme. Actually, Anthony Joseph, I don't think he's here, was one of the mentors. Is he here? No. He was one of the mentors, and there were these 30 poets who were mentored for 1 year or 2 years each, working very closely on a collection. And those poets have gone on to be, for anyone who knows English, British poetry, have gone to be some of the big names in poetry at the moment. They just hoover up all the major awards and stuff. And that was because they had the one-on-one with an individual, much more experienced poet over that period of time. In a way, more successful than the master's degrees, right? But also quite costly. It was funded by the Arts Council. So, not everybody can have that kind of funded mentoring scheme. Should we take another question?
Hi.
Oh, okay.
Hi, Bernardine. I just want to say that in 2019, when you won the Booker Prize for Girl, Woman, Other, and you were the first person of color to actually win that prize alongside Margaret Atwood, I think a lot of us who were writing or trying to find that writing space just suddenly saw ourselves in a way that we would not have seen before. And I thought to myself then, I wonder if I'd ever get to congratulate her. So many years later, I would like to say many congratulations, because you did something for all of us. And you've always championed not just your own work, but you've championed the work of women of color, women in circumstances who could not have the money and the time to write. And most recently, you had a Facebook post where you spoke about a grantor competition, where, what you saw and what we all saw was that the winners were almost all white women and men, and maybe with just 2 or 3, just like a small sprinkling of women of color, of Asian and black women. So I want to ask you, how much of your job do you think, do you see as, also kind of equalizing that literary world in Britain? And how hard has it been for you as a woman of color navigating this field? And now, of course, you're at the pinnacle also as the president of the Society of Literature. Thank you.
So the project you're talking about is the Grantor Best 20 young novelists, which comes around every 10 years, and it began in 1983, and it was incredibly influential back then because a lot of the writers who were on the original list became the writers, novelists who dominated literature for several decades. So that would be Ian McEwan, Julian Barnes, Salman Rushdie, Kazuo Ishiguro, a whole host of writers. And every 10 years it comes around. And this year there were 2 black people on it and no Asian people out of 20. And yet there are lots of eligible candidates for it. I could mention easily a couple more names who could have made that list. So it felt like they were taking a backward step because they've never had so few people of color on that list. So it's a white list, and that's a problem, right? So I had to speak out, open my mouth on Twitter when I was on it. And I've been doing that for a very long time, and they never paid much attention to me. So they do now. So my tweets become quotes in the paper, although that didn't make it into the papers, I don't think. So I have a platform, and I have a certain amount of cultural capital now in order to be heard, and that is something that runs alongside my own creativity, which is my #1 priority. My books, my literature, my career is #1 for me, but alongside that, I'm also very community-minded, and if I can create opportunities, speak out, highlight sort of inequality, whatever it is, alongside my career, then I would do that. And actually, as I said, with social media especially, it's very easy to do that. Setting up various schemes that I've set up is also quite easy to do because I will set them up, and often I'll get someone else to run them, manage them. But I will have initiated something that will bring about change. And I think this is very much part of what I do, and it brings me a lot of pleasure, and it also means that I can enjoy what I have today. I don't feel isolated from my community. I don't feel guilty with what I have, which is considerable right now, because I know that I did not bring the, I did not, I sent the ladder down. And I continue to send the ladder down. And I think we could all do that. But at the same time, I fully understand writers who just want to focus on their writing. You shouldn't feel that you have to be an activist because you're a writer, especially if you're a person of color, because nobody expects that of people from other demographics. They just get on with their work, right? But some of us are more activist-minded, and I think that's really important. So you've got 10 minutes. So the lady here, and then somebody at the back, maybe. Yes. The mic's coming.
Yes, I think my advice is where I go from here. I've written, this is my second book, it's a memoir on race. Very controversial, because I started writing it in COVID, just after, and George Floyd happened after. But a lot of my interpretation of microaggressions and race has had a significant effect on my white readers. You know, they're really moved by it in Canada, and almost because they think of themselves as a non-racist society in Canada, they sort of have opened up their eyes to race and how a black person of color, walks a different path than they do, side by side, but a different path in experiences. But at first I thought, I want to continue writing because I'm retired from my profession. I'm 72, old. But at first I thought novel, based in the Caribbean. And then I thought, no, I want to continue this, I want to interpret what's happening now in terms of Canada and the States, different approaches we have taken to race. But what genre is that? Do I do it from a journalistic point of view? Because I want it to be based on research, but also my interpretation of what's happening. And not fiction, but real, in my interpretation, but also factual. But is that a specific genre, or I'm not sure?
I think probably they call that creative nonfiction.
Creative nonfiction?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
But Bernie, you for one of your novels, you had written. You started out in prose and then threw away and then turned it into a verse novel. So some things can start one way and then you might realize the genre doesn't quite work for it. And yeah.
Okay, yes. Lady here.
Hi. A question for Ayesha. So, as you work with, as you're working with history, I'm sure there's so many senses that you're using to try and excavate on all of your creativity. And I wondered, since working with Bernardine, what new things have you added to your creative writing practice, and what new things have you discovered in the work that you're doing?
That's a great question. So I think the biggest thing right now is place. Just talking to Bernie and walking around London with her and seeing how she used that to write her own books. I'm just soaking that up, and like I'm not in the place I'm writing about. I hope we can get to it soon. But even as I'm in Senegal and in a place that has a similar vegetation and climate, I soak up things a little differently now. And this is just by walking with Bernardine, and I don't know if she knew I was doing this, but just seeing how she soaks up place and how she interacts with whatever place she is, and seeing that translate into her work. So that's been a thing that I've soaked up so far.
Because the work in progress is historical.
It's historical.
And it's set in a part of the world, as you say, you haven't been yet.
I've never been to, yes.
So how do you create a sense of place through your imagination,
Yes.
essentially?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So, like when you were writing The Emperor's Babe, which is set in Londinium, but I was walking with you in contemporary London, and there were, I think it was by, I don't know why Fisherman's Wharf is coming to my head. Did we go there?
Maybe,
but
that area.
that's popping into my head. So just seeing that translate into your book, that's something that I've absorbed. Yeah.
Cool. Shall we take one more question? So, lady here, yeah.
Thank you both. When you started writing, did you have a sense of who you thought your audience was? And do you still have that? And does it enable you, or does it hamper you in any way?
Are you asking me, or both of us?
Both of you,
Yes. Yeah, I went to a creative writing workshop in my 20s with other young black women, and I left the workshop because we were all new. We didn't know what we were doing, really. And I found that when I went home, I started writing for them. And they were very, very political feminist women. And I found myself self-censoring myself before I took the work to them. So I left the group very, very quickly because I realized that situation was crushing my creativity. Ever since then, I've tried to think about the novel, the story that I need to tell. And I know that I cannot predict who my reader will be. So if I think about a readership, I start to shape the work for them, for their approval. And I don't want to do that. But at the same time, I'm human, right? So I'm aware that there is a readership out there, and I'm aware that different people are going to be looking at my writing from different perspectives. So there is that awareness, but I try not to think of a particular audience. Now, I know that when people are writing certain genres, like crime, thriller, horror, romance, there are certain expectations that they write for a certain kind of audience. But with me, as a literary writer, I don't want to have that in my head. I don't want to have anyone else's voice in my head. But at the same time, I'm also aware that most likely my readership is female, because men don't read books by women very much. The stats are out there, right? And that I'll probably have a strong women of colour readership as well. So there is that awareness, but I don't think of specific types of readers when I'm writing. I try not to.
I just learned that our time's up, but very, very quickly. I used to write for my mother because she introduced me to literature, and we had the same taste in books. So I was writing a book that my mother would like reading, and she passed last year, sadly. And I didn't realize this, she couldn't see. But the year before she passed, she asked me for all my audiobooks and tearing up. So she listened to all my books before she passed. So yeah, she was my reader. And then a bigger thing is like the African, I really write for African readers because I feel like there's so much we don't know about ourselves. And then I love a wider readership. Like I love getting translated. I really love getting translated. It's so cool. So yeah.
It's interesting because there are so many issues around African literature that the people who have the bigger careers tend to leave the continent, and once you've left the continent, who are you writing for? Yeah. So that's also why I picked you, because I knew that you were writing for an African readership. Yeah. So I suppose we're gonna finish now. We would like to thank Rolex.
Thank you, Rolex.
Rolex. For creating this opportunity, not just for us, but for so many other people in the arts. And also from this conversation, I hope that some of you will go away and come up with ideas for mentoring schemes, because this is a literary, academic, creative audience. And where you see there are things to be done in your field, where there isn't enough literature or academic writing or whatever, you can actually create these schemes yourself in a very little way. You can approach people to mentor you, and you can also set up mentoring schemes and offer yourself as a mentor. So I hope you take this away with you. And also thanks to BOCAS for this incredible trip to Trinidad. Thank you. Bye.